there's Kevin with Rogue Deck Builder here with this week's episode of The Market. It's almost Wednesday. It's Monday somewhere in the universe. So back to my normal schedule of not doing Market Mondays on Monday. I've been very, very busy with other things, but had this on my mind a couple days ago when Rudy from Alpha Investments did a video on the MySQL archives and how they've crashed in value. And I want to address that video because I think there's a lot of misconception with exactly what MySQL archives are and how comparing them to any other of the more collectible cards I think is a very misleading for Strix Haven. So we're going to talk about Strix Haven, we're going to talk about Flesh and Blood, we're going to talk about Pokemon, and we're going to talk about the overall state of Magic. So actually let's kind of reverse orders here, and let's start with that one at first. So Magic the Gathering has had quite a robust year. Since the pandemic started, it has just gone through the roof with prices going just crazy. We are in an unprecedented time period with Magic the Gathering. In my last week, we talked about how there was a last call issued on Theros, Throne of Eldraine, and Ikoria. And typically this doesn't mean much. It just means that Wizards of the Coast is not going to be doing another print on them. And it's the last time the distributors can order from Wizards of the Coast from their various warehouses that they keep product. And since then, it's only been a week, we've seen an increase in the price of these particular boxes. We have now Throne of Eldraine, which is around the $100 price that you can start funding them now. And Ikoria and Throne of Theros Beyond Death are not that far away. In fact, you can't even get them from any distributor anymore at their regular distributor price. All the distributors that have any of this left in stock have raised the price of all of them. In fact, I actually think Ikoria is the only one that's still at the regular distributor price around the $80 to $85, which distributors charge for booster boxes. The rest of the three that are current in standard that are going to be rotating, Core 2021, Throne of Eldraine, and Theros Beyond Death are all above that price. Now, for some context, let's just give some history about Magic and booster box prices in the, not too distant past. So when I started the Store of Gonero Games, there was always basically all Pioneer sets, with the exception of some sets like Eldritch Moon and A3 Volt. You could still buy at distributor cost or not that far off of distributor cost, basically any Pioneer Age set, because Wizards of the Coast changed their print philosophy during, I think it was New Phyrexia was the official set that they changed their print philosophy to what's called print to demand. Instead of just doing normal runs, they were going to print the sets as long as there was still demand for standard sets that were in their standard lifetime. So they wouldn't have to go through another situation of having New Phyrexia boxes, I think, hit all the way up to like $200 during when people still needed cards for standard. And they didn't want that to happen again, nor did they want to miss out on those profits. They didn't want the other guys making the money off of a product that is still live, can still be squeezed some profit value out of. And so they came up with a new policy to better appease the player base, to be able to still get cheaper cards or cheaper booster packs, or especially for draft. You could still continue to do drafting for those particular sets as long as it was still considered a standard set. They'd still support it. So for those reasons, they changed their print philosophy, and it led to a bit of overprinting for Magic the Gathering from Return to Ravnica all the way to, even to current days is where there was a lot of overprinting. Now, not all sets had multiple print waves. I think the Ixalan and Rivals of Ixalan was kind of the stinky era of Magic the Gathering, and both those sets have low supply comparatively speaking to the sets around them, mainly due to the fact that there just wasn't a lot of initial demand, which never triggered those third and fourth and fifth reprints to keep enough supply during the standard season for those sets. And there is just naturally less supply of those in existence than something like Khans of Tarkir. But going back to when I opened this store, it wasn't very hard to get any of these sets because of the high supply on like either eBay or even through distributors alone for around the original distributor cost, around $80 a booster box. Now that has changed, and it's changed very quickly. We've seen prices just increase rapidly since the start of the pandemic, with more money going into collectibles, with a lot of the crypto bro money, with a lot of the kind of speculator hysteria that everyone and their dog thinks they're an investor now. That's added a lot of money into Magic the Gathering, and is especially the sealed market, even the singles market, has had a lot more demand than it normally would have from your more organic growth, I would say, or natural growth you would see from the player bases stripping out the cards or the sealed boxes for play use. So I would even say there's more collectors. It really is more investors or more people that have just noticed the price of Magic the Gathering, and it's shifted a lot of value that used to take years to accumulate to things that are now happening overnight. And in fact, we're seeing this in real time with sets like Theros Beyond Death, Throne of Eldraine, and Ikoria already not only going up in their singles prices, but also going up now in their sealed prices to above distributor when they're still considered in-stock standard. So I think that some of these videos that have been coming out by other YouTubers that are a bit misleading with how the market of Magic the Gathering is actually much, much, much stronger than they're giving it credit for, because I still remember the days when Return to Ravnica was an $80 booster box for an entire decade. You could go back and buy Return to Ravnica clear when we're into, Kaladesh at that point. And in fact, like I was saying, there were only a few sets that actually were the exception to the rule, like things like Kaladesh and Aether Revolt, and Eldritch Moon were the only ones that I can really think of. Khans of Tarkir was another one that went above their distributor box prices, even just after a few years after they rotated out of standard. So we are in some very, very strong market times for Magic the Gathering as far as sealed and singles are concerned. So with that kind of out of the way, is this going to hold? That's the big question. We do have some warning signs, not from Magic itself, but kind of its sister games in Pokemon and Flesh and Blood. Both of those had just incredible, same thing during the whole last 2 years, I would say, that Pokemon and Flesh and Blood have they print it sells immediately. You can't even find things when they are printed for distributor cost, or even close to it. The distributors sell immediately, and then you never even can find anything for MSRP because it just goes crazy on the market. Well, we've seen some massive cooling now on those particular products. You can actually go over to TCG Players and look at Battle Styles. It still seems it's pretty healthy here. Battle Styles booster boxes are still going for much over. I don't know if you can see that on the screen here. Let me pull it over here for you. That a Battle Styles booster box is going for $160, so that's twice the amount of, that's about what MSRP would be for a booster box if you were to buy it individually packed for 36 times 4 and give change there. That's going to be around $150. So that's probably where we want it to see. Stores do need to make money. Retail like Walmart needs to make money, and they need to make decent margins. And sealed boxes it's been very, very tough for stores to be able to do that for the last decade. I think it's been kind of there have been many stores that have failed by trying to go through traditional retail margins to make things like Pokemon or Magic the Gathering work. So I wouldn't even say this is necessarily a weak market for Pokemon. We are just not seeing the crazy market that Pokemon. Yes, Battle Styles is kind of a dud set, but we're also starting to see some of the sets that were the next best thing, things like the Shining Fates or the Champion's Path, have definitely cooled off, as these prices used to be just astronomical compared to their distributor cost. It would cost you at least triple, quadruple. And then the supply of these were also very, very hard to come by, that they would be just completely sold out for any reasonable price tag for these particular sets. So that's kind of the million-dollar question, is Pokemon definitely has cooled. I don't think that anyone can make that argument. The one thing that I think that Pokemon does have going for it is Chilling Reign numbers are abysmal. They're still having issues with their printer, and it might actually do some wonders for sets like Battle Styles or sets like Shining Fates or Champion's Path. So I'm expecting that these sets to recoup, not because of demand necessarily wanting them, but just being the only available options. We actually came to a time for Pokemon that you couldn't get any Pokemon from any distributor. It was all sold out. Every stinker set ever, every stinker product ever was sold out, just for the desperation of stores to be able to have any Pokemon for their consumer base to buy. And that was just, we've never seen a market so hot for Pokemon. The same thing can be said for Flesh and Blood, but now we are actually seeing availability for Flesh and Blood. And this was something, again, that these prices are pretty high comparatively speaking. So Monarch, going for $419 when distributor cost for these was like $53 a booster box. That's some pretty crazy gains. So it's still a very, very hot market, but it's not going for $500 or $550 or $1,000, which was originally what some of these Monarch, as soon as they'd print it, they would just fly off the shelves and there would be no supply, there would be no availability, there would be no distributors would have any of these things anymore. And even though they still are high price comparatively speaking, they are available. So both of them have cooled off, in my opinion, of Pokemon and Flesh and Blood. And I guess we're just going to have to wait and see where Magic is going to be headed with its sets coming out, how well they're going to age long term, and how long this kind of bull market can actually happen for, or can actually hold for Magic the Gathering. So anyway, let's go ahead and talk about the other thing that I want to talk about is I highly suggest coming over here for some context and clicking on this video from Rudy 1000 Messes with basically talking about how worthless Magic cards and the Strix Haven Mystical Archives. And I think there's some good caveats of information in this video, but I think that Rudy's missing the mark on what Mystical Archives actually are. Mystical Archives are basically the version that we've seen in every set, every standard set. They have a little bit of flair for alternate arts of cards. These aren't expeditions. They aren't masterpieces. These aren't meant to be rare. These are very common. Even every version of these are incredibly common, one per pack. We saw this with Throne of Eldraine doing the showcases, and we saw this with the kind of the different treatment for the enchantment cards from Theros, and we also saw this with mutate cards with Ikoria. So those are a better comparison to be comparing the Mystical Archives to than something like an expedition. Of course they're not worth money. Strix Haven is actually still doing quite well for a release set. And this is kind of one of the issues I always have with Rudy, is it's always doom and gloom with every set that comes out. He said this with Ikoria, he said this with Theros Beyond Death, that there's never been a set that's sold for so terrible, pre-sold out the gates. Well, we've kind of changed positions with Magic the Gathering. It used to be the pre-selling in the first week or the first month was the hot time for a new set. The single prices were through the roof that people were still trying to acquire, and I think we have to chalk that up to inefficiency more than anything. It took a while for the market to actually be able to produce a much of both the single cards as well as the sealed boxes and stuff for the consumers to actually eat up what they wanted to eat up at that time period. Now we've just become so efficient at getting boxes into the hands of consumers that it used to take like a month to 2 months for things to crash in value, and now that happens basically overnight, where the supply just gets injected right into the market and the prices crash. But I don't think there's any argument to be made that Eldraine, Theros Beyond Death, Ikoria, War of the Spark, Ravnica Legions, Guilds of Ravnica, all of those sets have just been performing phenomenally, comparatively speaking, to when they hit their lows. All of these were around the $60, $70 box prices. None of these were considered like extremely good sets. We had like Guilds of Ravnica that was hot for a while, but even War of the Spark, it bottomed out pretty low. We had even, Ikoria. Ikoria bottomed, I still remember videos saying, $50 a booster box for Ikoria. Same thing with Theros Beyond Death. Zendikar Rising's a little bit misleading because the box topper holds so much of the value. It still is the chase card. And that's also something you have to factor into with a set. The same thing with Khans of Tarkir. It took a long time for Khans of Tarkir cards to recover because all of the value was soaked up by the fetch lands. When fetch lands were so expensive and you could guarantee 4 per box and they were worth $15, okay, you were already $60 there towards your $80 box price of the Khans of Tarkir. So there could only be $20 worth of value in Khans of Tarkir, or otherwise people would just keep cracking boxes and cracking boxes and cracking boxes and getting that value over the price that they paid for it. So everything has to come back to Jesus. Everything has to come back to how much its distributor cost was for a box. Otherwise, mass box openers will continue to open up boxes and open up boxes and open up boxes. And one of the things that I think that the standard sets have been able to recover so well is because of this. Because this is what mass box openers see right out of, there's no time. There's been zero time for mass box openers to be able to look at the numbers and realize, is it worth it for me? Or what used to be the strategy for mass box openers is they'd open like 1,000 booster boxes day one. So they'd buy 1,000, open them all up, throw them all up on TCG Player and eBay. With those high pre-order prices or those high week 1, week 2, week 3 prices, and be able to make a profit on those time periods of them being overinflated because the prices were still high because there wasn't enough supply injected into the system. And now with being so efficient to get to the goods into the consumer's hands, that no longer is available. And box openers cannot just buy 1,000 boxes, open it week one, and be able to expect to make a profit, because this happens with every set. And instead, what we're seeing right now is kind of a flip-flop of when the prices are actually worth a lot. Towards their end of their standard season is where we're starting to see the most value of these particular boxes. And couple that with the fact now with it looks like the Wizards of the Coast is changing its policy back to print to demand-ish is what I like to call it, because they're not really, they've stated now that Ikoria, Theros, and Eldraine are not going to be reprinted, and we still have quite a while. We have June, July, August, half of September before we have rotation for these to still be in their standard lifetime. So it's kind of that's why I'm bullish on these sets too, and I actually think this Strix Haven is doing quite well for at least comparing it to its predecessors of still holding the $76. Now, Zendikar Rising, like I said before, is always going to be kind of the black eye here because of the box topper. All things are not created equal when you throw all the value, you throw what everyone wants into that box topper, it's going to soak up most of that value. But this is still another set that I don't think is going to age bad or poorly. It's going to be a set that people are going to continue to want cards for Commander and Casual. There's some very powerful cards in the double-faced land/spell cards, and there are many. There's a good land cycle with the pathways that have proven themselves, and I think this is going to be a set that's not going to be a sneaker set in long term. So going back onto Strix Haven, and that's kind of where I have the difference of opinion with Strix Haven, is of course, Mystical Archives right now are worth nothing. They are a throw-in. You still have your rare, you still have your chance of a mythic, you still have all the other goodies you can get from a regular pack, and then you have the Mystical Archive on top of that. So let's take a look at Mystical Archives and see what they're doing. So first of all, we actually have just the regular Mystical Archive. So this is version 1. So version 1, so how many cards is there in? I thought you used to have a thing on 63. So there's 63 of these cards, and yes, the vast majority of them are worth under $1. But that is very, very, this is just a duh thing, because if you look at the normal versions, let's take any one of these. So let's look at Thrill Possibility that's going for 26 cents. Of course, Thrill Possibilities is going for 26 cents when there's a billion other versions printed in Theros Beyond Death, for example, that's 25 cents. There is nothing as far as rarity is concerned that is special about this Mystical Archive. Yes, if they would have made these, what was it, for expeditions or for masterpieces or invocations, this was like, what, 1 per every 3 boxes had an invocation in them. So even the commons, even the ones that were common rarity in other sets, this different special treatment of art was extremely rare, and therefore the rarity of the card, the price would show that. It would show that it is a very, very tough card. If you open up a booster box of Strix Haven, you're getting multiple Thrill Possibilities. It is not a rare card by any stretch of the imagination. There's 1 out of 63 per pack, so basically it's going to take you 2 booster boxes to get one of every Mystical Archive. They are not common or rare in any stretch of the imagination. And then you also have the fact that these ones show up at higher quantities, the uncommons do, than the rares do, or the mythics do. And yes, the price is going to show accordingly. And so trying to compare apples and apples with something like a Demonic Tutor to a Thrill Possibility, and then trying to just give a base average for a Mystical Archive is very, very misleading. And again, when you have something like Demonic Tutor and a Teferi's Protection, which are the chase cards that everyone is going after, they are going to soak up all the value, and as just a consequence, the rest of these cards are not going to be worth anything. It's like if Wizards had the ability to print bars of gold in the booster packs, that those would be depreciated just based on the fact that you're paying a set amount of price for a product, and if all the value is in A, then B, C, D, and E are going to lose the value at a faster rate than A is if A is the one that's going to be in demand. So where does that leave us long term with Mystical Archives? I actually do tend to like them. Now, Rudy talks about turning down a brick, whatever he means by a brick, of 2 cents a piece for the Mystical Archives. I think at 2 cents a piece, I would take that all day long, because one of the things about Mystical Archives is most of these cards actually do have real world value, and you just have to wait a while for these cards to go back up in value. It doesn't take you that much of searching to go back in sets, even like, let's go back even to Throne of Eldraine, and look at what is that common blue land. It did get a ban from Pauper, but it's still highly played in Commander, and it's worth like 90 cents. Or even things like the Seven Dwarfs are worth like $1. Or we go back to Ravnica Allegiance with their commons in there that are worth $1. Or Growth Spirals got all the way up to like over $1 at one point. And you have even like Wilderness Reclamations that went up in value. Those weren't rare by any stretch of the imagination. They did have a lot of demand for them. And one of the things that I do like about most of these Mystical Archives is they do have real world demand. Now, will Negate ever be able to be worth anything? Probably not. I think the buy list will eventually pay money for these cards. You wait 2 years, Negates will be buy listed for 10 cents, no problem, because I think there will be enough people that do want this art treatment, that do like this. They prefer this Negate over any other Negates, but you have to compare. You can't compare Negate to Demonic Tutor. You have to compare Negate to Negate. And there are billions of Negates out there from other different versions and other special treatments. I can even think of like the Jace's Spellbook that has a Negate treatment to it. So yes, when you make everything special, nothing is special. And this Negate is just competing with tons and tons of other Negates with special treatments. So it can't hold any like huge value. It's not going to be worth a $10 card. First of all, the rarity will never be there for it to be $10. But the specialness will also not let it be there because there's so many other ways of being a special. But it doesn't mean that these are worthless, and they're definitely not 2-cent cards. And that's where I'm kind of a little bit suspicious of turning down that whole offer of taking it for 2 cents a piece, because I guarantee you places like Card Kingdom and Star City Games are going to raise their buy lists eventually for most of these Mystical Archive cards because they have real world value. The only thing that never gets put on buy lists for like 2, 3, 4, 5 cents, all the way up to 10 cents, 25 cents, is cards that we consider true bulk. True bulk are cards that have no chance of ever seeing constructed play. They're not going to go into Commander deck. They're draft trash. None of these cards, well, I would say not none, but the vast majority of these cards are not considered bulk. They have real world value. Things like Claim the Firstborn are seen play in Pioneer. They're seen play in Historic. They're seen play in, of course, Standard. This is a card that is very, very good. The problem with many of these cards is I think that Wizards was a little bit, they jumped the gun on many of these and just wanted to get them in their alternate in these particular arts when they just recently had a reprint. I mean, many of these were already available in Standard, so it's just more avalanche of supply adding to these cards being able to accrue any sorts of value because they have been recently reprinted. That is the name of the game with Magic the Gathering with singles. The singles market, you have to give time for the demand to outstress the supply, and many of these cards that are on the uncommon and common or had many different versions recently reprinted are going to take a while. But again, what I was saying before, there are cards with high supply, extremely high supply, like Sol Ring, that still do have real world value because the demand is even higher than their high supply. And that's why I'm quite bullish on many of these cards. I wouldn't just blanketly invest in Mystical Archives, but I'd definitely be looking for things like Cultivate for a long-term hold, because Cultivates do tend to recover. I mean, I've been playing this game for long enough to remember when, what's the card out of, I think M14 has the go search for land or any non-forest basically and put it into play, because you can actually get shocklands for it. That was a draft trash. That was something that was going for 5 cents. It didn't have any real value, and I believe Farseek, that's the card, right? Let me see if I'm correct about Farseek. So Farseek was one that was a absolute draft trash. And does look like it has been reprinted. So when was Farseek last reprinted? Magic 2013. So this is when I remember playing in Magic 2013. Yeah, it's $1.85. Here's a good real-world example of something of when you're short-sighted about stuff. So Farseek gets a reprint, goes all the way down from 40 cents to 20 cents to 10 cents. It's a common. There are millions of these in circulation. And it just doesn't get a reprint for a few years, and look what happens. They become rare and rarer. Something like a common actually has an advantage over something like a rare, because rares get put in rare binders and Farseeks get thrown in the garbage. This was something that didn't have, I'm sure, a buy list price back here when it was worth 10 cents at its low here. This is something that was very, very common. and stores weren't wanting it. They were overloaded with it. They're in bulk bins like crazy. And now look, a few years later, I guess more than a few years. I mean, it does take a while, but these things are real world. And that's one thing, again, that I like most about these mystical archives is none of them seem to be like they're absolute stinkers. They tend to be very Farseek type cards. You have cards like God's Willing that sees a lot of play, Tezzeret's Gambit, Compulsive Research. All these cards were, they chose these cards for a reason because they did have real world playability. I think Tendrils, wasn't this card a money card at one point? Like not in the, not too distant past. Yeah, Scourge. So Scourge, yes. So Scourge was its last, printing. So it got all the way up to $3.21. Yes, Scourge is pretty rare in the scope of things, but it was an uncommon clear back in the day. And it really does have a point. The newer sets do have incredibly high supply, but I still don't think that the supply is much higher for cards in this day and age for any standard-based set than they are from things like Return to Ravnica. And the evidence for that is basically in these sets. With these sets being able to recover, and things like even Return to Ravnica in these sets not really outpacing them as far as their prices are concerned, because the supply was very, very high. I still think the glory years of Magic, the height of Magic, was Return to Ravnica through probably Khans of Tarkir, maybe even Battle for Zendikar all the way through Kaladesh. We started to see a lull here in Amonkhet Ixalan. Dominaria recovered quite well, and then Dominaria through War of the Spark was kind of another resurgence in Magic the Gathering. And this time period, Eldraine, Theros Beyond Death, and Ikoria was also considered kind of a low moment in Magic, comparatively speaking to some of the other ones. But for the most part, Magic has been pretty consistent with its player levels from Return to Ravnica all the way towards now. And I think the biggest difference with where we're seeing a lot of the prices, as I mentioned before, is Magic is now getting some real money put into it as far as the sealed market is concerned. It's now competing. There's a lot of speculator money that didn't exist during this time period that was competing with players actually, purchasing this stuff. So we'll have to wait and see how well like Eldraine and Theros age. But if Dominaria is any Dominaria and Kaladesh is any good example, where there was quite high supply for these sets too. These sealed prices are very expensive, and in the scope of things too, like $110 worth of value in a booster box is pretty reasonable for how young a set like Kaladesh actually is, and how many reprints have actually been reprinted. That's one of the problems with sealed product. The contents of sealed product is if any card ever gets over $25, if anything actually starts adding value to these older sets, it inevitably gets a reprint. So anyway, I hope people are following my train of thought here with the Strix Haven Mystical Archives. So again, if you do try to compare all cards not created equal, to just individually thinking they should all hold like $3, $4, $5, that is very, very it's very misleading, because again, these are things that are one per pack. They are not rare by any stretch of the imagination. It's pretty easy to get these demonic tutors. In fact, demonic tutors, probably these versions, these ones they might end up being the highest supply of demonic tutors ever printed into the supply, and they're still holding quite well. I mean, the demand is outstretching the supply of even these demonic tutors, and I think these ones will have good gains going forward. So last but not least, the etched foils. These ones actually are rare. So these are another ones that I think that if you can get in on a low price for these etched foils, eventually you will find those collectors that want to collect full sets of etched foils. And we're starting to see that with the Eldraine. The cards, the foil versions of cards, yes, they were in every collector pack ever. They went for nothing. Foils were the new non-foils. I mean, you had to get borderless foils. Borderless foils were the new foils, and then foils were the new, nothing special about them. But we've seen a lot of those even start to recover. We've seen things like stamped foils out of the promo packs. They used to be worth the exact same amount as the regular versions. Same thing. They start to go. But I mean, worst case scenario is you have some sort of scenario like this with like Vito, for example. So Vito, Thorn of the Dusk Rose, this is a foil, is worth the exact same as this normal price, but the foil will always go up if the normal goes up. So the same can be said for these Strix Haven cards, these Mystical Archives. Its bottom is only as low as its normal versions could go. So when you analyze any one of these Strix Haven mystical archives, you got to think of where is Growth Spiral's bottom? Where is Growth Spiral going to be the lowest it's ever going to be? Before inevitably the commander players are going to scoop this up, they're going to keep adding it into more and more commander decks when it's actually going to have some real world value. The thing is, we started to see Growth Spiral, for example, start to go up in value to begin with. So it did get a reprint in Commander 2020, but I think this is probably the one that the straw that broke the camel's back here. Ravnica Allegiance was, at a time, it was a card that was starting to gain some, some significant gains from another common that actually had real world value. So that is my 2 cents about the Mystical Archives. I'm very bullish even on the etch foils. I think that them being by far the rarest version of the lot are the best ones to pick up. If you literally can get them in at 6 cents a piece, I think that is just a steal of a deal to get in on any etch foil of just how rare they are for 6 cents a piece. And let's just one more time, let's just take a look at some of these cards from just the main set and just look at, like, again, there really isn't any stinkers from this. Maybe like Infuriate. This just keeps getting printed like crazy. It has become kind of a mainstay in different standards. There will be a standard that will use it. And this is something too you have to keep in mind. If maybe in 10 years down the road Infuriate gets introduced, well, let's not even go that far, because most people can't, they can't save for next week. Let's say 3-4 years down the road, Infuriate doesn't get many reprints. Maybe they went on to something else, and then in standard they do end up reprinting a format where they put maybe Infuriate in uncommon. It gets into a tier 1 deck, and people want to jazz up their deck, and they go back and buy all of these Mystical Archives. We saw that actually happen with some of the cards. Now I can't even think of the card that was reprinted, but it was like an Odyssey card. They got no, it was Opt. I remember Opt. It was Opt got a reprint in Dominaria, and then, or maybe was it not Opt? It wasn't Opt. It was another card. Now I can't even think of the one that was originally like an Odyssey card. They got a reprint in one of the sets, and then it was the first time it had been reprinted, and now it was in standard as a common, and decks were actually running it, and people went back and bought all the Odyssey cards just to be different. It was kind of the new foil, or like a foil treatment, basically. It became rare for the people who actually wanted to play it in their standard decks, and it had a run on that particular card. And even though the common version was worth like 15 cents, the version from Odyssey, or whatever the set it was printed in, was worth like $3. And I can see the same thing happening for these just because of their art treatment. So yeah, you have to look at things in an entire scope of everything that's going on, rather than trying to compare apples and oranges with these sort of factors that factor into the cards. So my conclusion with the Mystical Archives is I think that they are going to age well long term. I'm thinking that we're still in a pretty good shape for Magic the Gathering. We'll see how long that could last. We are going to go through some some growing pains as far as everything kind of evening out from money. Like, you don't have the choo-choo train anymore of the money supply of all the stimulus checks and everything, continuing to come in. And so that's going to leave a lot less money available for collectible card games. And, there probably will be some tough times ahead with, books being balanced and whatnot. But we do have still a pretty vibrant market that isn't showing at least any huge signs of slowing down anytime soon, which is surprising to me, because of all the failures of Magic the Gathering, they continue just to chug along and chug along and chug along. So anyway, this has kind of been a all over the place video. I hope I was able to make sense. It's kind of late at night here. I probably shouldn't be recording this late at night, but I wanted to get my thoughts out before I forget them for another day and never even make this video. Hope you enjoyed this video. This has been Kevin with the Rogue Deck Builder. Thanks for watching.